Hi, I'm Emily and welcome back to the Pepper Knits Knitting Podcast. I'm a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia and thank you for joining me for episode 22. I have some very fun new whips that have kind of crept onto my needles over the past few weeks, but I'm having a lot of fun with them. And yeah, let's jump right into my finished object. So this is my finished object. It is a hot water bottle cover. It's so soft and I absolutely love this. It is a gift knit for my sister. She has her birthday coming up and I somehow got the idea that I thought she would like a Boucle hot water bottle cover, and it's going to be really hard to give this to her. I'm so tempted to keep it for myself, but I know she will love it just as much as I do. I did use a pattern to knit this. It's called the Romi hot water bottle cover, and the original pattern uses the Drops Boucle yarn, the Alpakka Boucle, which is a lot heavier than the yarn I used. I think that's technically an Aran weight yarn, but I did use a different Boucle yarn. I picked this up from my local yarn shop, Calico and Ivy, and they've only recently started stocking Isager and Sandnes Garn, so it was really nice to be able to see them in person and pick something really nice for this project. So I ended up going with the Isager Boucle yarn, and this is quite a thin yarn. How many meters? It's 175 meters per 50 grams, so it is a little bit on the thinner side. I hadn't really picked out a pattern yet, but I thought that holding this just by itself would probably not really give me a gauge that I liked the look of. And also I suppose the purpose of a hot water bottle cover is to be quite insulating, so I thought holding it with something else like this would just help with the insulation as well. This is the Sandnes Garn Alpakka Silk, which I have never used before, but it is so incredibly soft. I've really enjoyed using this yarn even though I was holding it with something else. And it kind of wasn't really the star of the show at this project, but it is a really nice yarn. It's 70% baby alpaca and 30% mulberry silk, and 50 grams is 200 meters. As you can see, they're not an exact color match, but it was close enough, and yeah, the closest I can find in the store. And I think together you can't really tell that they have very different colors. I think it just creates a really nice fabric. You can definitely see that, yeah, the gauge of the fabric is fairly loose still. I'm definitely glad I added in that second strand. I also think it helped make the knitting experience a little bit more enjoyable. I've heard some pretty harsh things about knitting with Boucle and how frustrating it can be when your needle kind of gets stuck in all of the little loops, which I definitely experienced a little bit, but I think holding it with a smooth second strand probably alleviated a little bit of that. So as I mentioned, this is the Romi hot water bottle cover pattern, which is, I think is a free pattern on Ravelry, and the designer I think is Tanya Eberhardt. And yeah, it was a good pattern, easy enough to follow. It has a 19 stitch gauge, and I have no idea if I'm actually on gauge or not. I ended up using a 3.5 millimeter needle, and I didn't do a gauge swatch for this. I figured it wasn't super important and it's not a huge project, so by the time you knit a gauge swatch, you could kind of do quite a bit of this actual knitting on the project. And I also figured that because you start at the bottom with a Judy's Magic cast on, you could just keep increasing until you get to the size that you need. So yeah, I just kept trying the cover on until I was happy with it, and ended up, I think, doing the same number of increases as written in the pattern, so that was very simple. I did, however, change a little bit on the neck here. I was very sensible actually, and I'm quite proud of myself for doing that, but I put in a lifeline before I started doing the decreases just in case I wanted to rip them back, and it's quite hard to be able to see all the stitches and pick up both loops properly in this yarn combination. And I'm quite glad I did that because I did have to rip out the first attempt at doing the neck shaping up here. As written in the pattern, I think you're decreasing every round, and yeah, it just didn't really fit this hot water bottle or my gauge very well. So I just ended up doing very similar decreases to as I would do a wedge toe on a sock, and decreased every other round, and that ended up working. For the actual neck as well, I didn't really follow the pattern or read it properly. I just kept trying on until it was long enough to cover the entire thing. And for the bind off, I did do as the pattern recommends and did Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off on a much larger needle size. So I think I went up to a 6mm needle just to make it extra stretchy, and I quite like how it looks as well. It curls over a little bit and kind of gives the illusion of an I-cord bind off. I will say that it is quite a snug fit, and you can kind of see some of the purple hot water bottle peeking through, which is not my favorite, and I don't really love the purple color, but I have very limited options, being that it's not really winter weather here. So this was the only one that I could find. I just had to make it work. It's not the worst, but I would have rather have gone for like a neutral colored bottle instead. So yeah, it is pretty snug on here. So hopefully she won't need to take this off too often. I feel like once it's on there, you can just fill up directly with the cover on and it should be fine. I was very tempted to go for the cream colored boucle yarn, but I thought that is kind of asking for it to get stained and have really visible dirt all over it, especially because she has 2 young kids who always have dirty chocolate hands and are putting their fingerprints everywhere. I thought the brown would be a bit of a safer choice. So I didn't end up wet blocking the cover. I think it was in Laura Penrose's Vlogmas or a podcast episode. She spoke about how she makes her hot water bottle covers. I feel like she's one of the most popular influencers to be making hot water bottle covers. But I remember her saying that she never wet blocks them. She just kind of puts them on the hot water bottle and then fills it up with warm water, and it kind of blocks to the shape that it is. So that's what I ended up doing as well. I just filled it up with some warm water from my tap and then just let it cool overnight and emptied it out. And that definitely helped even out the fabric a little bit. It was pulling the sides in ever so slightly, which was fine when it was full. You couldn't notice it, but yeah, that's kind of relieved that issue, which is nice. I do obviously have a little bit of yarn left over. I only bought one of each of these, so it was nice that I could get a whole project and have a little bit left over. So I used in total 31 grams of the boucle and 24 grams of the alpaca silk. So I have a pretty decent amount left over. Not enough to make another cover exactly the same, but because I do really like this one and I would love one for myself, I think I might hold these together and stripe it with another yarn combination as well to have a stripy boucle hot water bottle cover for myself. Not sure when I'll get around to actually making that. Maybe when the weather cools down a little bit more, I'll feel in the mood to be making something like that. But that is so far the plan for the leftover yarn. So yeah, that's all I have to say about the cover. It's very nice and I hope my sister enjoys using it when winter comes around. Moving on to my works in progress, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 at the moment. My Sweet Shop blanket is like in hibernation. I haven't worked any more on it since the last time I shared it, but I do have some good progress and I think one new whip that I haven't shown before. My first whip is in a bit of a state with a lot of yarn hanging off it, and it's a little bit of a mess, but I'll do my best to show it off nicely and do it some justice. So this is the Calm Down tee designed by Lily Kate Makes. And yeah, I'm making some pretty good progress on this and it's very close to being a finished object. In the last episode, I had finished off the yoke and I think I was about here. I just about joined in the round for the body. I have obviously since then finished the body and done a little bit of the ribbing, but we'll get to that in a minute. I am just working my way through the second sleeve at the moment, and then we'll be very close to finishing. The yarn that I'm using for this is Sandnes Garn Duo, which I also purchased from Calico and Ivy. It's a DK weight yarn, it's 55% merino and 45% cotton, and there's 115 meters per 50 grams. I wanted to try this as a bit of a DK alternative to the Knitting for Olive cotton merino. It does have a lot more wool content. I think the cotton merino is only 20% wool, but I think this one will be a really good transitional yarn, especially in a t-shirt. I think it will be perfect for those days where it's not really cold enough for a sweater, but I want something more than just a cotton t-shirt. I'm knitting this t-shirt in the second size and on a 3.5mm needle for a 21 stitch gauge. So the reason why there's so many ends and things hanging off of this project is that I underbought yarn and one ball is a different dye lot. That was definitely my fault. I double checked my yardages against the pattern and I'd underbought by like 0.1 or 0.2 skeins. I was just kind of hoping there would be enough buffer built in that I'll be able to make it work, but sadly I don't think that's going to be the case. So I did go back and try and get another ball, but they only had a different dye lot and it was a little bit lighter in colour. I'm not sure how well that is picking up, but this new dye lot was definitely noticeably lighter, especially when you're knitting it into a fabric. When you change dye lots, it's always so obvious. So I'm just having to make this work. So before I had that ball, I had knit the entire body. There are also some nice subtle decreases here to do shaping in the body. I'd also finished off all of the ribbing. Thankfully, I hadn't done the bind off. That is something I try and do if I'm thinking something might not be quite long enough, which is kind of the case here. I'll do the ribbing and then put it on to some try-on tubing and then block it before I do any bind off, because I know I'm way less likely to go back and change something if I've already done a tubular bind off. I could tell at that point I probably wouldn't have enough yarn, so I just stopped, put it on pause until I could get the other ball, and sadly it wasn't the same dye lot, but that is totally my fault. So I did rip back the ribbing and figured that the different dye lot can just be used in all of the ribbing on the hem, the cuffs, and potentially I'll need to go back and redo the neckline in the new colour if I don't have enough yarn. That's what I've done on this sleeve, and I think potentially it's a little bit noticeable that the cuff is in a slightly lighter colour. I think it's probably one of those things that once you know it, you can maybe see it, or potentially I'm just looking at it because I know that it's different and I've been looking at it for too long. But in the overall scheme of the t-shirt, I really don't think it's that obvious. So that is my plan for the rest of this t-shirt. I'm going to finish off the second sleeve, which I'm very close to doing. It really isn't that much knitting for these little short sleeves. This is all the yarn that I have left of the original dye lot, which I don't think is going to be enough for the whole of the second sleeve. So I'm kind of thinking I will need to rip out the collar and reclaim the yarn from here in order to finish that sleeve, and then do all of the rest of the ribbing in the new dye lot. I'm kind of hoping I might be able to add a little bit of extra length to the body as well. When I try this on, it's just feeling a little bit too cropped, and I'm not sure I'll get much growth with blocking. I didn't really get much change in my row gauge in my swatch, but I'm a little bit hopeful that maybe the weight of a whole t-shirt will drag it down a little bit. We'll just have to see. I'm a bit reluctant to add length into the stockinette with a new dye lot, so potentially I will just keep knitting the ribbing until it's at a length that I'm happy with. But I don't need to make that decision right now. I think I'm just going to focus on finishing the sleeve and then go back to the body. So this is the first time I've knit a pattern by Lily Kate Makes. And I think in the last episode I mentioned a few things that were just a little bit different than what I've been used to. For example, I think in the armhole shaping for the front, it just said something like, copy exactly as you did for the back, rather than rewriting out instructions, which is not a problem, and that's very easy to do. Just something that I noticed was a little bit different than what I'm used to. The construction of this t-shirt was really fun to do for the yoke. It's basically a saddle shoulder with this beautiful ribbing detail, but with a set-in sleeve instead of like a contiguous sleeve that you keep knitting in the round. And I love a set-in sleeve. I think they fit really nicely and they're really fun for me to knit. I really like doing all of the short row shaping on the sleeves, and yeah, they just look really polished. I will say that it was kind of tricky to get this bit here to look neat, and I still don't think it looks completely perfect. These stitches are essentially live when you go to pick up the rest of the sleeve, and as I just kept knitting, like doing all of the ribbing continuously, and it just looked really messy, and it just looked like such an obvious jump that I wasn't happy with it. I did end up tinking down for both sleeves and fudging it a little bit and just like kind of fixing it up to make it look as best as I could. But yeah, I wish there was maybe a clearer way to make that look less messy, or maybe it's just inevitable with this type of construction and the way that you're picking up stitches kind of awkwardly in the corner. I do really like though that you're picking up stitches to have like a bit of a raised knit stitch on the edge of the saddle shoulder. I haven't seen that in a pattern before. I think that's like a really nice, unique design feature. One thing though I will say that I really liked about this designer's pattern writing is the way that the short rows for the sleeves are written. Instead of having all of the short rows written out row by row, which can be very easy to lose track of where you are, they are all tabulated for each size. I'm not sure how you would go if that's the first time you've ever done short rows, whether that would be a little bit confusing or if you would need a little bit more guidance as to what the heck you're doing. But if you've ever done short rows before and you understand the concept, I think it's so much easier to have them tabulated, and you just can very easily find the information you need. You know how many stitches you're knitting past each turn for every set of short rows. So I really appreciated that. I'm someone who has my knitting patterns on my phone, and I could just mark off the table each time I'd finished that set of short rows and then erase it to redo it for the second sleeve. So I really appreciated the extra effort that went into doing all of those tables. Oh, and I should mention also, for this set-in sleeve, I have an infamous history of knitting set-in sleeves that end up being too tight. So I had learned from all of my mistakes and knit the third size for the sleeve. The pattern also has decreases worked into the sleeve, which I just didn't really envision for this t-shirt. I didn't think I would really like the puff sleeve shape. I also felt like I didn't really need them. I don't think my arm really changes shape very much from the top of my shoulder to across my bicep here. So yeah, I just omitted them, and that was very easy to do. I probably used up a little bit more yarn than I anticipated. And of course, knitting a size bigger on the sleeve would use more yarn, but I would rather just make it work elsewhere and have sleeves that fit me properly, because I'm sick of knitting sleeves that end up being too small. I have tried this on, and it definitely has more ease than what the sample pictures have, but they do look like fairly fitted sleeves. So yeah, I'm glad I ended up going with that decision and not having super tight sleeves. I think it just matches the overall ease that's in the body as well. So that is my calm down tee. I'm looking forward to finishing this off. It's very close now. I'm hoping I can have a little bit of yarn left to add length into the body. Just looking at this now, I can tell it's going to be too cropped even once I've finished the ribbing. But yeah, I love the color, and this yarn is really nice and soft. I'm looking forward to seeing if it changes very much when it's been blocked. I am getting a little bit of rowing out, which is sometimes obvious depending on the lighting. Across here, where I was obviously working everything flat, and I don't really have that issue very often. So that makes me think it probably is the yarn, but it's really not that big of a deal. It's not super obvious. My next work in progress hasn't had a huge amount of work done since I last shared it, but it is the hot pink loungewear shorts that I have been working on. They probably don't look very much different, but I promise I have been adding a little bit of length. I'm probably about halfway through like the inseam length that I want before I can split off and start adding to the legs. This is a pair of self-drafted shorts that I am just making up to basically use the yarn that I have. It is this really bright pink eucalyptus yarn that my parents bought back for me when they were traveling last year, and it's been in stash for over a year, so I really wanted to put it into a project. It's very, very soft, and I think it will make a really nice, comfortable pair of loungewear shorts. I did consider making it into a tank top or a t-shirt, but I just knew I wouldn't really reach for it, and yeah, a colour like this is probably not something I would wear every day, so I felt like this would be the perfect project to use this yarn up. So essentially I am just doing a raglan to have like a centre front and a centre back seam, and they'll end up being like quite flared out shorts, but they're fitting quite well at the moment. They're definitely not too tight. I wanted them to be nice and loose and oversized. I'll go back and add in like either an I-cord tie or some cord or ribbon through the little yarn over holes that I made in the waistband, just to make sure that they actually fit properly around my waist. I anticipate this yarn will probably grow and stretch quite a lot as I wear and wash these, So at least if I have something in there to make it adjustable, they'll hopefully be able to fit even after stretching out. It's definitely not my most enjoyable project to be working on at the moment. It's getting a little bit boring, and being a 100% plant-based yarn, it's not, the easiest thing for my hands to be working on, but I'm just slowly chipping away at it and I'll eventually get there, but there's no time pressure on those or anything. It would be nice to finish them before winter comes around, but I'm not putting pressure on myself. They'll be finished whenever they're finished. My final work in progress is the one that has been getting the most attention. It is another gift knit, and it is for a colleague of mine who is about to have her second baby any day now, which is very, very exciting. It is another little Sunday morning romper. This is the second time I have knit this pattern, and this time I am knitting it in 100% merino wool. The first one was for a summer baby, so I knit it in some cotton yarn. But I figured because we're getting into some cooler weather now, I could probably get away with knitting a little short-sleeved one in 100% wool, which is much nicer to work on. I'm knitting this out of the Patons Dreamtime Merino, which is 169 meters per 50 grams. So it kind of makes it like in between a sport and a fingering weight yarn, but it ended up being quite good for this pattern. It's also super soft and machine washable, which is very important to me. I didn't want to gift a baby item that couldn't be put in the washing machine. I did machine wash my swatch just to check that it would be okay, and it came out completely fine. I was also worried there might be some color bleeding, but I don't think that happened at all, so I can feel pretty confident gifting this and saying that it's okay to put it into the washing machine. I am knitting this in the 1 to 3 month size. It has quite a big range of sizes, all the way from like tiny little newborns up to maybe 1 year, so it's a very versatile pattern that I think is, really good for gifts. I have no idea if I'm actually on gauge or not. The pattern calls for a 25 stitch gauge, so I'm using a 3.25 millimeter needle, and I think I'm pretty close. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, I suppose, with baby things. It can either fit them earlier or later, and you never know how big or small a baby's going to be or how much they'll grow and how fast. So I figured that this would be a good in-between size. And also the fact that it's short-sleeved but made of 100% wool would make it a little bit more versatile in the weather that it can be worn. So obviously I'm doing these really cute little stripes. So I'm doing 6 rounds of the brown and then 2 rounds of the white. I love this color combination. I think it's relatively gender neutral as well. She does know that she is having a boy, but for any future babies in their family who she wants to re-gift this to, I feel like it can be a lot more versatile. I did just buy a single skein of each color, and I just bought these from my local Spotlight. It's a relatively inexpensive yarn. I think it was $12 full price for a ball, and I think there was like a 20% off sale when I bought them, so it came to be a pretty cost-effective project. I was a little bit worried about running out of the brown yarn. I knew that I wanted to make them short-sleeved, so I hoped that that would be enough yarn. And I was cutting it a little bit close. This is all I have left of the brown, which will be plenty to do the second sleeve. All I need to do is 6 rounds and then do the white ribbing. So that will be enough to do the second sleeve. After that, all I need to do is the ribbing for the little leg holes. You just pick up stitches all the way around the leg holes and do some more 1x1 ribbing, and then there is like a closure with buttonholes along the bottom here. The first version I made, I did end up putting on some poppers instead of buttons. I just felt like that would be a little bit easier to do. If I have some left over, I'll probably do the same here. But if not, I'm sure I'll have, a few buttons that I can take from my stash for this. The back is also closed up with a button, and then you're instructed to leave a long tail on the cast on and crochet like a little chain to be able to do up the button, which is very cute. I did a German twisted cast on, so the neckline is super stretchy. I'm a bit worried the armhole is not going to be stretchy enough. I did the bind off instructed in the pattern, which is like a twisted knit bind off. I hadn't done it before, didn't really enjoy doing it. I feel like it's not that stretchy. Maybe I didn't do it properly, so I'll have to go back and check that I've done that right, but I think I'm going to have to undo it because I just feel like it's a little bit restrictive, and yeah, I want this to actually be wearable. Ideally, I would like to do the leg hole ribbing in the brown, but looking at this, I'm just not sure I'm going to have enough yarn, and I don't want to have to go halfway through and then run out, so I might just keep with the theme of the white ribbing, which I think will still look really cute. I did attempt to do jogless stripes down the back, which worked okay, but I think it's kind of inevitable with 2 round stripes that you will still see them. I did the method where you knit 1 round in the new colour and then slip that first stitch of the new colour, and then just keep going around. But I think for 2 row stripes, yeah, it's just kind of always going to have a jog. But that's okay, I mean, it's on the back, and it is like a nice reminder that it's something handmade and it hasn't been knit by a machine. I did also carry the yarn down the back just so I wouldn't have so many ends to weave in, and I feel like the fewer ends the better, although there are still quite a lot of ends to weave in. I just think it helps with the longevity when it's being machine washed if there are fewer ends. So hopefully these will be okay. I'm just going to have to do my best to make sure they're really secure. If I was going to knit another one of these, which I potentially will in the future for other babies in my life, I think I would change the increases on the raglan if I was going to do the stripes again like this. I just don't really love how the knit front and back looks with the stripes. It's not the ugliest thing, and obviously it didn't bother me enough to go back and change it after I had started, but it's something I'll keep in mind. If I make another one with stripes, I'll probably just sub out to make one right and lefts. In order to keep the stripe pattern consistent throughout, and I wanted to have the sleeve split on like the beginning of a brown stripe, I did just add in 1 extra raglan here so it would finish on the white. I did forget that I had done that, and then when you get to the bottom, you're binding off some stitches to basically split off the front and the back flaps. And I just couldn't work out why my numbers weren't adding up and why it was all wonky, and I had 4 extra stitches, and I was like, that's so weird that it's only 4. Maybe I was knitting the wrong size. And then I checked the pattern and I was like, that's exactly what I have done wrong, is that I forgot I added the extra raglan. So once I realized that, it was very easy. I just, put those extra stitches into the cast off on the side and then kept following the pattern for the size that I was knitting. So I'm very close to finishing this project as well. This is something I am trying to get done fairly soon, and I potentially could probably finish this today if I have enough knitting time this afternoon and this evening. The sleeve doesn't take me very long. I did the first sleeve this morning when I was eating breakfast, and then I would just need to pick up and do the ribbing on the leg holes and then deal with all of these ends, which I'm not looking forward to. But yeah, I will try and weave them in very securely. One thing that I did also change based on my last version was just doing the decreases for the back shaping here. The original pattern has the decrease in the first 2 stitches, which is fine, but I just feel like it's a bit more difficult to pick up stitches neatly and not leave any weird gaps. That was probably exacerbated in my first one using a 100% cotton yarn. It just looked a little bit messy and I didn't love the final result. So I just did a knit one and then moved the decreases over by a stitch. I just feel like that's going to be easier to pick up stitches and looks a little bit nicer. So hopefully this will all be finished and gifted by the next episode, and probably at that point baby will be here, which is very exciting. So those are all of my works in progress. I felt like I kind of flew through all of that, but I'm just very excited to be able to talk about all of these. I do have a couple of plans that I wanted to share as well. The first plan is for this single skein of Juniper Moon Farm Herriot fine that I have in my stash. This is in the colour Travertine, and it is 75% alpaca, 25% polyamide, and there's 420 meters per 100 grams. I had a sweaters quantity of this for a different project, and I ended up needing to order an extra skein, but unfortunately couldn't get the same dye lot, and this one was significantly darker. So I just put this aside and made that project work, which is a different story altogether. But I did want to hang on to this because it is such a beautifully soft yarn, and I thought one day I will find the right project for it. I guess technically, because it is like a polyamide and alpaca blend, it could be used for socks, but I was just really concerned about the amount of pilling that I would experience with this yarn if I made it into socks, and I just didn't really think it was the right project for this yarn. So I have been thinking a little bit more about what I'd like to do with it. I really think this yarn would look amazing in a lace project. Obviously I only have the one skein, so I can't go too wild with a huge lace project. But I think a little scarf, kind of like a Sophie scarf but in a lacy pattern, would look amazing with this yarn. I've been browsing through Sari Nordland's patterns. I know she has a lot of beautiful lace and cables, and I have kind of been thinking about either the Laulu shawl or the Poet's scarf. I think the Laulu shawl is the one with cables and lace, which I'm kind of drawn to a little bit more at the moment, but I also think the Poet's scarf is really nice. If you have any other suggestions on little scarves with some lace incorporated into them, I would love to hear your suggestions as well. I've never knit a pattern by Sari Nordland. I'd heard a lot of good things about her, and one day I would love to eventually get around to knitting one of her sweaters, but the stars have just never aligned on that. I think it would be nice to start off with knitting a little accessory by her. I have one other plan as well. I have kind of been itching to cast on a sweater and just have like a nice woolly sweater on the needles. The last sweater I knit, apart from my cognac cardigan, was probably the Northland sweater, which I was knitting in like November, December last year. I don't have any sweaters quantities in my stash at the moment, and I'm on a little bit of a tight budget, so I was having a look through my current sweaters and just having a think about if there's anything I'd potentially like to frog. I know that's not for everyone, but for me, I would much rather reclaim yarn from something I'm not wearing and make it into something and do justice to that yarn, and yeah, have something that I actually want to reach for. I kept coming back to my Aros sweater, which I knit, I can't even remember when, sometime last year or the year before. It's a pattern by Petite Knit, but it's one of her older patterns. So I think there's just not as many like nice fit considerations and details that she has in a lot more of her up-to-date patterns. It is a saddle shoulder construction, and I think the yarn that I used for it just didn't really suit that construction. I ended up knitting it in Drops Lima, which is an alpaca and 65% wool and 35% alpaca yarn, and I just felt like the alpaca didn't give it the structure that it needed in the saddle shoulders, and it just kind of hung a little bit weird. Maybe also I knit a size too big, or yeah, I just didn't really love that sweater. The neckline was also a bit of a weird shape. I think even in the podcast episodes where I was working on it, I didn't really love the neckline. It was too thick and like a bit of an odd oval shape. Didn't really like the pearl ridges either. I also felt like the ribbing in the cuffs and the body was too short. I just prefer a little bit of a longer ribbing on a cuff and on the body. And one other thing also was there was like a weird tension discrepancy, like right in the center front, that I'd always straight away be looking at when I put the sweater on. So all of those things combined just meant that I never wanted to wear that sweater. So yes, as you can probably guess, I have completely frogged that, and I've washed the yarn, it's all dried, and I've wound it back up again, ready to be knit into something new. So here is the swatch that I knit for my new sweater. I definitely find if I'm going to frog a sweater, I like to have a new project in mind, just to make sure I definitely want to be doing this, and obviously it does take a little bit of effort to frog a sweater. Wash the yarn, soak it, and then dry it completely and rewind it. It's definitely worth it for me, but I want to be sure that I have something in mind that I want to be knitting. And I think it's nice to get excited about the yarn again. I was having a look through my favorites and my saved like sweaters and things on Instagram, and I kept coming back to the Clara sweater by CL Knits. The designer's name is Carissa, and this pattern was only released earlier this month in February 2025, so it's a pretty new release. This is a drop shoulder construction with a 20 stitch gauge, and I'm pretty sure I managed to get gauge on the recommended 4mm needles. And the thing I absolutely love about this sweater is this beautiful cabled rib detail. It has it on the cuffs, the hem, the neckline, and then there's also that classic cable like detail that runs through the shoulder seam, which has become quite popular at the moment. I feel like I've seen a lot of designs have that really nice shoulder detail. This pattern has 10 sizes and is graded up to a 60-inch bust. I think there's like a decent amount of positive ease built into this. From memory, I think it's about 18 to 20 centimeters, which is really good. I think I want to be knitting things with a little bit more positive ease. So as long as I have enough yarn for it, I think I'm going to try and go for, you know, the upper end of the recommended ease. So yeah, that's the next thing. I do need to decide exactly what size I'm going to cast on. I was a little bit concerned that the cable detail would be lost in the slightly darker colour. Obviously the sample photo is knit in a beautiful light colour, but I think you can still definitely see the cables and there's not too much loss of definition. So I think this is going to look really nice. I'm not ready to cast this on just yet. I think I'm going to try and clear my needles off. At least the romper will be finished. I think I'm going to try and finish the Calm Down tee before I cast that one on. I'm also kind of thinking it would be nice to have that set aside as like my honeymoon project. We'll be staying down in the southwest of WA for a week after our wedding as a bit of a mini honeymoon. It won't be like a proper honeymoon, but I think it would be nice to have a project that I can take down. So that is a wrap on all of the knitting that I have to catch you up on. I do have a little bit of sewing that I also thought would be interesting to share. If that's not your cup of tea, that's completely fine. I will see you in the next episode. But I do have a little bit of a, I guess, honeymoon wardrobe that I wanted to sew, although obviously I will wear all of these things after that as well. So firstly, I made a pair of Dawn shorts, which is patterned by Nielsen. And I have made this pattern before. I've made a couple of pairs of the jeans and I have quite a bit of the denim fabric left over. So I thought it would be good to make a pair of shorts. It's definitely a quite involved project and there's a lot of swapping over with top stitch thread and regular thread. And obviously you're putting in a whole zipper with a fly and like pockets. They're definitely far from perfect. And I think if you really take your time and do a lot of practices, you could make it look a lot better. I'm not in love with the colour of the denim. It's a bit of a weird mid-wash colour. But the other pairs of jeans that I've made before with that fabric have faded quite a lot with washing. So I'll probably just put them through the wash a couple of times just to lighten them up and make them look a little bit more worn in. I have also made a couple of Fawn dresses, which is a pattern by Common Stitch. The first one I made was kind of like a wearable toile. I had a cotton bedsheet that I found in an op shop and I'd made a dress out of it already, but I had heaps left over, so I thought it would be good to use as a bit of a toile. And yeah, that one turned out really cute. It's the shorter skirt version with sleeves, and I also did the modification with the tie in the back. I did have to make a few changes just to get it to fit me a little bit better. Obviously the pattern is built in with quite a good amount of ease in it and makes it a really comfy, roomy, easy to throw on dress. I just felt like the waist was sitting quite low on me, but that was an easy modification. I just shortened the length of the bodice and then attached the skirt a little bit higher. So that was the first Fawn dress, and then I made the second one with the midi length skirt and without sleeves. I also made a quick mock-up of the bodice on that one, just because I didn't think I would like the wide straps that are in the original pattern. I just didn't think it would suit me. I'm quite glad I did that because I did have to make a few changes. I took in the center front and the back seam a little bit, and obviously reshaped the neckline and the armholes a little bit just to make the straps a tiny bit narrower. And I love the fabric choice I had for this one. I was really nervous to cut into the fabric because I liked it so much and I wanted to have it into a dress that I would want to wear. It's definitely a lot more of like a trendy, vibrant print that I would normally go for. But for some reason I saw it and I just could really visualize this dress, so I went for it and I think it paid off. Hopefully I can get a lot of wear out of it. I've already worn it a couple of times. And yeah, it's just a super comfortable, easy to throw on dress, and it has pockets, which is so handy. The last thing that I sewed was the Esme skirt by Tint of Mint. Again, I used some fabric I found in an op shop. I think it's a cotton and linen blend, I'm not completely sure. But I have made a pair of trousers out of this fabric before, and again had heaps left over, and it's just been sitting in my stash until I found the right project. It's a really cute little wrap skirt that ties with like a knot and a bow in the side. That was another really quick make. It came together very quickly. I think I did it in like 1 or 2 evenings, including cutting all the fabric and putting the pattern together. So yeah, I've had a lot of fun with my sewing machine lately. I think sewing is something that I either get really into or I don't want to touch my sewing machine at all. But that is a wrap on today's episode. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I would love to know what you're knitting on at the moment or what your current plans are, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye!